Rebecca Anderson's hands shook as she pressed them against the smooth, cold surface of the security desk. The bright lights of Haven 7 Space Station's main security office made the sweat on her forehead shine. Her voice came out steady, though. Years of military training didn't fade easily. "My daughter is missing," she said, looking straight into the large purple eyes of Officer Glaxon. "Emily Anderson, 8 years old, last seen 2 hours ago, near the education center on level 3. The tall bird-like alien tilted his head, feathered crest rising slightly in what Rebecca had learned was a sign of mild confusion. "Missing?" he asked, his translator making his voice sound like smooth stones falling into water. "Children of station residents often explore the public areas. Our systems monitor all locations." Rebecca fought down her frustration. After 3 years on Haven 7, she should have expected this response. Alien species didn't understand human parent-child relationships. To them, children were simply young members of the species who needed basic care until maturity. "You don't understand," she said, pulling up a photo on her comm unit. "This is Emily. She never misses her check-in times. She knows the rules. Something's wrong." The image showed a smiling girl with red hair in 2 braids, wearing the standard station school uniform. Her green eyes sparkled with the same determination Rebecca often saw in the mirror. Officer Glaxon studied the image, his head tilting the other way. Behind him, 2 junior officers of his species, their crests not yet fully developed, exchanged glances. Rebecca knew that look. It was the emotional human look she'd seen too often. "Perhaps we should wait for Lieutenant Davis," one of the junior officers suggested. "He better understands human concerns." Rebecca's jaw tightened. More delays. She was about to argue when the office door slid open with a soft hiss. Lieutenant Michael Davis walked in, his security uniform crisp despite the late station hour. One look at Rebecca's face, and he knew. "What's the situation?" he asked, moving to stand beside her. His presence changed the room's atmosphere immediately. After 15 years as human liaison to alien security forces, Davis had earned their respect. "Officer Anderson reports her offspring is not responding to communications and has missed a scheduled check-in," Glaxon reported. "Systems show no medical alerts or security incidents." Davis nodded, then turned to Rebecca. "Tell me everything, from the last time you saw Emily." Rebecca took a deep breath. She left for school at 800 station time. Normal morning. She was excited about their science project. They're studying different atmospheric compositions. We had lunch together in the medical bay where I work at 1300. She was supposed to go to her coding class at 1500, then meet me back at medical at 1700. She checked her comm unit again. It's 1920 now. No messages, no response to calls. Her friend Amy said she never made it to coding class. Davis turned to Glaxon. "Full scan of all public areas, please. And I want access to the security feeds from level 3. Focus on the path between the school and the coding center." The alien officer's crest flattened, a sign of acceptance. His long fingers moved over the holographic controls. Multiple screens lit up around them, showing different areas of the massive space station. "Scanning," Glaxon announced, "though I must note that human children often—" "Emily isn't human children," Rebecca interrupted. "She's my daughter. She's smart, responsible, and she knows better than to wander off without telling me. Something's happened to her." Davis placed a calming hand on her shoulder, but his voice was firm when he addressed Glaxon. "Officer, you've worked with human security forces for 5 years now. You know about our protective instincts toward our young. If Rebecca says something's wrong, we need to take it seriously." The screens continued to flicker with different camera feeds. Rebecca scanned each one, her combat medic training helping her stay focused despite her rising panic. Then she saw it, a flash of red hair on a camera near the maintenance sectors. "There," she pointed. "Can you go back?" Glaxon manipulated the controls, rewinding the footage. The image showed Emily walking down a corridor, following something. The camera angle changed, and Rebecca's heart stopped. Her daughter was following a maintenance bot, but this one was moving erratically, its lights flickering in an unusual pattern. "That bot's malfunctioning," Davis said, leaning closer to the screen. "What section is that?" Glaxon's crest rose sharply, now showing alarm. "Section 47B. It's currently restricted due to complications with the cooling systems." Complications. Rebecca's military experience made her read between the lines. What kind of complications? The alien officers exchanged looks again, but this time there was real concern in their purple eyes. Davis answered for them, his voice grave. "The station's been having issues with the radiation shielding in that section. They were supposed to have it fixed last week." He turned to Glaxon. "Why wasn't this maintenance bot's malfunction reported?" "The radiation interferes with our monitoring systems in that area," Glaxon admitted. "We have limited sensor coverage until the repairs are completed." Rebecca felt the blood drain from her face. Her daughter was in a radiation-exposed area, following a malfunctioning bot, and the aliens couldn't even track her properly. She turned toward the door. "Where are you going?" Glaxon's translator couldn't quite capture the alarm in his voice. "To find my daughter," Rebecca answered, already moving. "That's not advisable," the junior officer spoke up. "The radiation levels." "I don't care about the radiation levels." Rebecca's voice could have frozen nitrogen. "My 8-year-old child is in danger. Nothing else matters." Davis stepped between her and the door. "Rebecca, wait. Let's do this right. We need protective gear, radiation monitors. Every minute we wait is another minute she's exposed," Rebecca said, her medic training painting horrible pictures in her mind. "You know what radiation does to human tissue, especially in children." The alien officers watched this exchange with growing confusion. To them, entering a hazardous area to save one child was illogical. The risk calculations didn't support such action. But as they observed Rebecca's face, they began to sense something they didn't quite understand. A force more powerful than logic, stronger than self-preservation. "We should wait for the maintenance team to repair the shielding," Glaxon stated. "The safety protocols." "To hell with your protocols." Rebecca's shout made the junior officers step back. "That's my baby in there." Davis looked at her, then at the aliens, then back at her. 20 years in space had taught him when to follow rules and when rules needed to bend. "Give us 5 minutes," he told Rebecca. 5 minutes to get proper gear. Then we go in. Together." Rebecca met his eyes, saw the understanding there, and gave a sharp nod. The alien officers watched in fascination as she pulled up the station schematics on her comm unit, already planning her search pattern. To them, this behavior was yet another example of why humans were classified as Deathworlders, species from high-gravity, high-danger planets who survived through a mix of physical resilience and what the galactic community saw as borderline insanity. But as they watched Rebecca Anderson prepare to enter a lethal environment to save her child, they began to realize they might need to update their understanding of human nature. They were about to witness firsthand why human parents were considered some of the most formidable forces in the known galaxy, and why Deathworlder might not be a strong enough term for a species willing to face death, not just to survive, but to protect their young. Officer Glaxon's crest rippled with unease as he watched Rebecca check the radiation monitor Davis handed her. In his species, young were cared for by the community, not individuals. The concept of one adult risking everything for one child seemed impossible. Yet here was this human, preparing to do exactly that. "Monitor all frequencies," Davis ordered, strapping on his own protective gear. "If we find her, we'll need immediate medical evacuation." Rebecca finished securing her protective suit, her movements quick and precise. Her mind was already running through radiation exposure treatments, mapping out the fastest routes to the medical bay. She hadn't survived 3 tours as a combat medic by being unprepared. 5 minutes, she said, checking her equipment one final time. Then on going in, with or without backup. The alien officers watched in silent amazement. They were about to learn why the galaxy's most dangerous predators had nothing on a human parent protecting their child. The maintenance sector's emergency lights cast long red shadows across the empty corridors. Rebecca Anderson moved forward, each step careful but quick. The radiation detector on her wrist beeped steadily, its sound growing faster as they went deeper into the restricted area. Lieutenant Davis walked beside her, his own detector making the same worried sounds. Behind them, Officer Glaxon moved with the natural grace of his bird-like species, his purple eyes glowing slightly in the dim light. The two junior officers had stayed behind to monitor their progress through the station's damaged systems. "Emily," Rebecca called out, her voice echoing through the metal corridors. The protective suit made her voice sound hollow, but she kept calling. "Emily, honey, can you hear me?" "Life signs are difficult to read in this section," Glaxon reported, holding up his scanner. "The radiation interferes with our equipment." Rebecca nodded, but didn't slow down. Her combat medic training told her exactly what radiation could do to a young child. Every second counted. She pulled up the station blueprints on her suit's display screen, checking their position. The maintenance bot was heading toward the cooling system access tunnels. Davis said, pointing to a junction ahead. "But those areas are supposed to be locked down." "Supposed to be," Rebecca repeated, her voice tight. She remembered how curious Emily was about the station's robots. Her daughter loved watching them work, often drawing pictures of them in her school notebooks. Of course she would follow one that was acting strangely. They reached the junction, and Rebecca's detector began beeping much faster. The radiation levels were rising. Glaxon's crest flattened against his head, a clear sign of distress. "These radiation levels are approaching dangerous limits for humans," he said. "Even with protective gear, extended exposure would be unwise." Rebecca checked her own readings. The alien was right. The radiation was getting stronger. But somewhere ahead, her daughter was in even greater danger. Without protection, Emily would already be suffering radiation exposure. How long would a child survive these levels? Davis asked quietly. Rebecca's medical knowledge painted a grim picture. Without protection, minutes before acute symptoms begin. An hour before. She couldn't finish the sentence. "We need to move faster." They passed through another set of security doors, these ones forced partly open by the malfunctioning maintenance bot. The corridor beyond showed signs of damage. Panels pulled loose, wiring exposed. The bot had clearly been seriously damaged by the radiation. "Look," Davis pointed to the floor. Small footprints showed in the thin layer of dust. They led deeper into the maintenance sector. Rebecca's heart jumped. "Emily," she called again, moving faster now. The footprints meant her daughter had definitely come this way. But how far had she gone? How long had she been exposed? Glaxon's scanner chirped with a different tone. "I'm detecting an anomaly ahead. The radiation pattern is unusual." "What do you mean, unusual?" Davis asked, but Rebecca was already moving toward the next junction. She turned the corner and stopped. The corridor ahead was bathed in a faint blue glow. The walls seemed to shimmer like hot air over pavement. Her radiation detector was now screaming in warning. "The cooling system's containment field is failing," Glaxon explained, his translator struggling to keep the alarm out of his voice. "The energy discharge is creating pockets of intense radiation." Rebecca studied the corridor. The blue light pulsed in waves, creating gaps in the deadly radiation. She had seen something similar during her military service, when a reactor had been damaged during a firefight. If you timed it right, you could move through the radiation pulses. If you got it wrong, "We cannot proceed," Glaxon stated firmly. "The radiation levels beyond this point will overcome our protective gear in minutes. We must wait for the engineering team to." "Mom." The small voice came from somewhere beyond the glowing corridor. It was weak, frightened, but unmistakable. "Emily." Rebecca's heart nearly stopped. "Baby, where are you?" "Mom, I'm scared. The robot stopped working, and my head hurts." Rebecca's medical training instantly recognized the symptoms of radiation sickness beginning. Without another word, she started removing the extra equipment from her suit, anything that would slow her down. "What are you doing?" Glaxon's crest rose in alarm. "You cannot mean to." "My daughter is dying," Rebecca said, her voice completely calm now. "Nothing else matters." "The radiation pulses," Davis said, understanding in his voice. "You're going to time them." Rebecca nodded, watching the waves of blue light. "Like jumping rope," she said, managing a small smile. "Emily loves jumping rope." "This is beyond dangerous," Glaxon protested. "The odds of survival." "Never tell me the odds about my child," Rebecca cut him off. She finished adjusting her suit, making sure she could move as quickly as possible. "Lieutenant, I need you to coordinate with medical. Have them ready for 2 radiation exposure cases." Davis looked like he wanted to argue, but 20 years of working with humans had taught him better. He nodded, already calling it in. Glaxon watched in fascination as Rebecca began timing her movements with the radiation pulses. His species valued logic above all else, but this defied logic. This human was about to run through deadly radiation to save a single offspring. It went against every survival instinct he understood. 3 seconds between pulses, Rebecca muttered, her eyes locked on the blue waves. "Corridor is about 30 meters. Need to average 2 meters per second." She did the math quickly. 15 runs between safe spots. "Can't stop moving." "Officer Anderson," Glaxon said, using her formal title. "The chances of both you and your offspring surviving this air." 100%, Rebecca finished for him. "Because I'm not leaving without her, and she's not dying today." Before anyone could stop her, Rebecca took 3 quick steps back. She bounced lightly on her feet, like a runner preparing for a sprint. Her eyes never left the pulsing radiation waves. "Mom." Emily's voice came again, weaker now. "I don't feel good." "Hang on, baby," Rebecca called back. "Mommy's coming. Just like we practiced for the station emergency drills, remember? You just stay still and let me come to you." She took a deep breath, watching the blue waves. Time seemed to slow down as her combat training took over. She had done this before, running through danger to reach wounded soldiers. But this was different. This was Emily. "This is madness," Glaxon whispered, but there was something new in his voice. Something like awe. Rebecca didn't hear him. The radiation waves pulsed, and she began to count. 3. The blue light rippled. 2. Her muscles tensed. 1. The corridor cleared for a brief moment. Rebecca ran. The aliens watched as she darted between the waves of deadly radiation, her movements precise and determined. Each pause lasted less than a second as she timed her runs perfectly. The radiation detector on her suit screamed in protest, but she didn't slow down. Lieutenant Davis held his breath, counting the pulses. Beside him, Glaxon's crest rippled with emotions his species rarely showed. They were watching something that would change their understanding of humans forever. Through the blue-tinted corridor, a mother raced against death itself to reach her child. And in that moment, the galaxy's definition of Deathworlder began to evolve into something far more profound. Because what made humans truly dangerous wasn't their ability to survive on a harsh world. It was their willingness to face any danger, defy any odds, and stare down death itself when someone they loved needed them. The radiation waves continued their deadly dance, but Rebecca Anderson had already stopped counting the pulses. She could hear her daughter's frightened breathing now, getting closer with each desperate sprint. She was going to reach Emily. The laws of physics, the rules of radiation, the cold equations of survival, none of them mattered, because she was a human mother and her child needed her. And that, as the alien officers were about to learn, was the most unstoppable force in the known universe. The world had shrunk to nothing but blue light and the sound of ragged breathing. Rebecca Anderson could feel the radiation seeping through her protective suit, making her skin tingle and burn. But she kept moving, kept pushing forward through the deadly corridor. "Talk to me, Emily," she called out, her voice steady despite the growing pain. "Keep talking, baby." "Mom." Emily's voice was closer now, but weaker. "The robot. It went through a small door. I followed, but then it stopped working." Rebecca passed another junction, checking her radiation detector. The numbers were far into the red zone now. Even with her protective gear, she was taking damage. Her medical training told her exactly what was happening to her cells, but she pushed the knowledge aside. Behind her, Lieutenant Davis and Officer Glaxon monitored her progress through their failing equipment. The alien officer's purple eyes were wide with disbelief as he watched the human woman continue through radiation levels that should have stopped her in her tracks. "Her vital signs are becoming unstable," Glaxon reported, his translator barely hiding the shock in his voice. "Body temperature rising, heart rate elevated beyond normal human parameters." Davis nodded grimly. "Keep medical updated, and get those engineering teams moving faster. We're going to need that containment field fixed for the return trip." Rebecca barely heard them. She had reached a maintenance access point, where several small tunnels branched off from the main corridor. The blue radiation waves were stronger here, creating strange shadows that danced across the metal walls. "Emily." "Which tunnel, honey?" The one with the red light." Emily's voice came from the right-hand tunnel. "Mom, everything's spinning." Rebecca's heart clenched. Dizziness was a bad sign. Radiation sickness was setting in fast. She checked the tunnel entrance. It was small, barely big enough for maintenance bots. An adult would have to crawl. Without hesitation, she got down on her hands and knees. The radiation detector on her suit was now giving off a constant alarm, no longer even trying to measure the deadly levels surrounding her. "Officer Anderson." Glaxon's voice came through her comm. "Your radiation exposure is approaching lethal levels. You must return immediately." "Not without Emily," Rebecca answered, starting to crawl through the tunnel. The metal was hot against her protected hands, and she could see her suit's outer layer beginning to degrade. "The human body cannot sustain this level of radiation," Glaxon insisted. "The damage to your cellular structure is already done." Rebecca cut him off. "So there's no point in turning back now, is there?" She kept crawling, ignoring the growing pain in her body. The tunnel seemed endless, each meter bringing more radiation exposure. But she could hear Emily's breathing getting closer, and that was all that mattered. Finally, the tunnel opened into a small maintenance chamber. The malfunctioning bot lay in one corner, its circuits fried by the radiation. And there, curled up against the far wall, was Emily. "Baby." Rebecca rushed to her daughter, quickly checking her vital signs. Emily's skin was hot to the touch, and her normally bright eyes were unfocused. "Mom." Emily tried to smile, but it was weak. "I don't feel good. The robot, it was doing a funny dance. I just wanted to see." "Sha, it's okay," Rebecca soothed, already pulling out the emergency medical kit from her suit. "Mommy's here now. Everything's going to be fine." She quickly gave Emily an anti-radiation injection, then started removing the outer layer of her own protective suit. The material was damaged, but it would still help shield her daughter for the return trip. "Officer Anderson." Davis's voice came through the comm. "Engineering reports the containment field is fluctuating. The radiation levels are becoming even more unstable." Rebecca wrapped the protective material around Emily, making sure to cover her completely. "How long until they can stabilize it?" 20 minutes minimum, Davis replied. "But your current radiation exposure, you don't have 20 minutes. Rebecca looked at her daughter's pale face. The anti-radiation meds were helping, but Emily needed proper medical treatment soon. They couldn't wait for engineering. "Then we're not waiting," she said simply, gathering Emily into her arms. "We're going back through now." "That's suicide," Glaxon protested. "Without full protection, the radiation will." "We'll do what it's already doing," Rebecca finished. But slower treatment means worse outcomes for Emily. And that's not happening. She adjusted her grip on her daughter, making sure the borrowed protection was secure. Her own skin was burning now, and she could taste metal in her mouth, classic radiation poisoning symptoms. But her arms were steady as she held Emily. "Mom." Emily looked up at her, fear mixing with trust in her eyes. "Are we going to be okay?" "Of course we are, baby," Rebecca smiled, pushing back her pain. "We're going to run through the blue lights together, just like dancing at home, remember? When we put on the sparkly lights in your room." Emily managed a small nod. Like a light show. Exactly like a light show. Rebecca kissed her forehead through the protective covering. "And when we get through, the doctors will make us all better. I promise." She turned back toward the tunnel, calculating the best way to crawl while protecting Emily. Her medical training was screaming about radiation exposure, cellular damage, and long-term effects. Her mother's heart didn't care about any of it. "Lieutenant," she called through the comm, "have medical ready. Full radiation protocols for both of us." "Already done," Davis answered. "Rebecca, good luck." In the security office, Officer Glaxon and his team watched their monitors in stunned silence. The human woman's vital signs should have meant unconsciousness by now. Instead, they showed her moving, protecting her offspring, planning their escape. "How?" one of the junior officers whispered. "How is she still functioning?" Glaxon's crest rippled as he considered the question. His species prided themselves on their logical understanding of the universe. But this defied logic. The numbers said it was impossible. The radiation levels said she should have collapsed. But as they watched Rebecca Anderson shield her child with her own body and begin the dangerous journey back, Glaxon began to understand something his species had missed about humans. They had classified them as Deathworlders based on their physical capabilities, their ability to survive harsh conditions. They had never considered that humans' true strength might lie not in their ability to survive, but in their ability to choose something they valued more than survival itself. Through their monitors, they watched a mother crawl through deadly radiation, her body failing but her determination never wavering. With each meter she covered, she rewrote their understanding of what made humans the most remarkable species in the galaxy. It wasn't their strength, their resilience, or their adaptability that made them special. It was their capacity to look at impossible odds, lethal conditions, and the laws of physics themselves, and say, "My child needs me. Nothing else matters." And somehow, through nothing but sheer human determination, make the impossible happen anyway. Rebecca reached the tunnel entrance, Emily secure in her arms. The blue waves of radiation pulsed ahead of them, deadly and beautiful. She took a deep breath, feeling the radiation burning through what remained of her protection. But her voice was steady as she spoke to her daughter. "Ready for our dance through the lights, baby. Hold on tight to Mommy." Because she was human, because she was a mother, and because some forces in the universe were stronger than radiation, stronger than physics, stronger than death itself. The power of a parent's love was one of them. The journey back through the radiation-filled corridor felt like walking through fire. Rebecca Anderson held Emily close to her chest, using her body to shield her daughter from the worst of the radiation. Each step brought new waves of pain, but she kept moving forward. "Keep your eyes closed, baby," she whispered to Emily, timing her steps between the pulses of blue light. "Just like when we play hide and seek. Count with me. 1, 2, 3. Emily's voice was weak, but she counted along. The extra protection Rebecca had wrapped around her was helping, but the child still needed immediate medical care. Rebecca could feel her daughter's elevated temperature even through the protective layers. Behind them, the maintenance chamber they'd left was beginning to destabilize. The radiation was causing the metal walls to creak and groan. Lieutenant Davis's voice crackled through the failing comm system. "Rebecca, the containment field is collapsing faster than expected. Engineering can't hold it. You have less than 5 minutes to clear the sector." Rebecca didn't waste breath responding. Every bit of energy went into moving forward, protecting Emily, fighting through the growing weakness in her legs. The radiation sickness was getting worse. Her vision blurred at the edges, but she forced herself to focus on the pulsing waves of blue light ahead. In the security office, Officer Glaxon and his team watched their monitors with growing amazement. The human woman's vital signs should have meant complete collapse by now. Instead, they showed her moving steadily forward, her pace never slowing. "Impossible," one of the junior officers muttered, his crest flat against his head in distress. The radiation levels. "Medical team is standing by at the sector entrance," Davis reported, his eyes never leaving the screens. "Rebecca, you're almost there. 3 more junctions to go." Rebecca heard him, but the words seemed to come from far away. The metal taste in her mouth was stronger now, and she could feel blood starting to trickle from her nose. Another sign of severe radiation exposure. But she could also feel Emily's heart beating against her chest, and that was all that mattered. "Mom." Emily's voice was frightened. "You're bleeding." "Just a little nosebleed, honey." Rebecca managed to smile, though Emily's eyes were still closed. "Remember when you got one playing in the low-gravity chamber? Nothing to worry about. Keep counting with me." They passed another junction. The blue waves of radiation were getting more intense, more erratic. The containment field was failing completely. Behind them, metal screamed as radiation warped the corridor's structure. 2 minutes, Davis warned. "The whole sector is going critical." Rebecca's legs nearly gave out, but she caught herself against a wall. The movement sent fresh waves of pain through her radiation-burned body. She could feel blisters forming on her exposed skin, could sense the damage being done to her cells. Her medical training told her exactly how bad things were getting. But her mother's heart told her something else. Emily was going to make it. Nothing else mattered. "Almost there, baby," she whispered, pushing off from the wall. "Just a little further. Tell me about what you learned in science class today." Emily's voice was faint but determined, just like her mother's. We learned about atmospheres. Different planets have different air. Some are toxic to humans." "That's right," Rebecca encouraged, using her daughter's voice to guide her forward as her vision grew darker around the edges. "So smart, my girl." "What else?" In the security office, Glaxon's crest rippled with unprecedented emotion as he watched the monitors. The radiation levels were now so high they were overloading his instruments. By every scientific measure, both humans should have been incapacitated. "Lieutenant," he turned to Davis, his translator struggling to convey his confusion. "How is this possible? These readings." Davis kept his eyes on the screen, but a small smile crossed his face. "Because she's a mother," he said simply. "And she's human. When those two things combine, Officer Glaxon, the impossible becomes merely difficult." The alien security officer looked back at his readings, his scientific mind trying to process this concept. In his species, young were raised by the community. The idea of one adult taking such risks for a single offspring went against every survival instinct he understood. But as he watched Rebecca Anderson stagger forward, blood now streaming from her nose and ears, still protecting her child with her failing body, he began to understand something profound about humans. They had classified humans as Deathworlders because they could survive conditions that would kill most species. But that wasn't what made them remarkable. What made them truly extraordinary was their ability to choose to face those conditions, to walk willingly into death itself, if someone they loved needed them to. "Final junction," Davis announced. "Rebecca, the medical team is right there. You can see them." Through her darkening vision, Rebecca could make out the shapes of people in medical gear at the end of the corridor. She was so close. Just a few more steps. Her legs finally gave out. She fell to her knees, but kept Emily cradled against her chest, still shielding her from the radiation. The medical team started forward, but the radiation levels still made it dangerous for them to advance. "Mom." Emily's voice was scared. "Mom, please." Rebecca looked down at her daughter's face. Despite the pain, despite the radiation burning through her body, despite the darkness creeping into her vision, she smiled. Because Emily was going to make it. Her baby was going to be okay. With the last of her strength, Rebecca rose to her feet. Her body screamed in protest, every cell damaged by radiation, every movement bringing fresh waves of agony. But she was human. She was a mother, and she had made a promise. Almost there, baby, she whispered. Just one more dance through the lights. The containment field behind them finally failed completely. The corridor filled with blinding blue light as radiation levels spiked beyond measurement. But Rebecca Anderson took those final steps, carrying her child to safety, defying physics, biology, and the very laws of nature. Because some forces in the universe were stronger than radiation, stronger than pain, stronger than death itself. A mother's love was one of them. And as Officer Glaxon watched this display of impossible human determination, he realized his species would need to create an entirely new classification. Because Deathworlder didn't begin to describe a species that could do this. Perhaps, he thought as the medical team finally reached Rebecca and Emily, they needed a term for beings who could look at certain death and say, not today, not while my child needs me. A term for beings who could make the impossible possible through nothing but love and determination. A term for beings like human parents. The medical bay of Haven 7 space station was unusually quiet. 3 days had passed since Rebecca Anderson had carried her daughter through deadly radiation to safety. Outside the treatment room, Officer Glaxon stood with Lieutenant Davis, watching through the observation window as medical staff tended to both mother and daughter. Emily was already showing strong signs of recovery. The quick treatment and the protection her mother had given her had prevented the worst effects of radiation exposure. She sat in her medical bed, color returning to her cheeks, drawing pictures with a tablet while doctors monitored her progress. Rebecca's condition was more serious. The radiation burns covered much of her body, and the damage to her cells had been severe. But she was alive, and the doctors said she would recover. It would take time, but she would heal. I have been studying human medical records, Glaxon said, his purple eyes fixed on the scene before him. By all scientific understanding, she should not have survived those radiation levels. Even with the protective suit, the exposure was far beyond fatal limits. Davis nodded, a small smile on his face. And yet here she is. Here she is, Glaxon agreed, his crest rippling with what humans had learned to recognize as deep thought. Lieutenant, I must admit something. I believe we have made a significant error in our classification of humans. Oh. Davis turned to look at the alien officer. How so? We labeled humans as Deathworlders based on your physical capabilities, your ability to survive harsh conditions, your resilience, your adaptability. Glaxon's crest moved in a pattern that indicated scientific precision. But after witnessing Officer Anderson's actions, I realize we have missed something far more important about your species. Inside the treatment room, Emily had moved from her bed to sit beside her mother's. She was showing Rebecca her drawings, and despite the pain she must have been in, Rebecca was smiling, helping her daughter add colors to the picture. What we witnessed was not merely survival, Glaxon continued. It was a conscious choice to face death itself. Not for survival, not for advantage, but for something else entirely. He paused, searching for the right words. In my species, young are cared for by the community. The idea of one adult risking everything for one child, it defies logical understanding. Davis watched as Emily curled up against her mother's side, careful of the bandages. Rebecca wrapped her arm around her daughter, protecting her even now. Love isn't about logical understanding, Officer Glaxon, especially a parent's love. Yes, this concept of love, particularly what you call parental love, it seems to override even your strongest survival instincts. Glaxon's crest rose slightly. Do you know what Officer Anderson's last words were before she lost consciousness after reaching the medical team? David shook his head. She asked about her daughter's radiation exposure levels. Even as her own body was shutting down, her only concern was for her offspring's safety. Glaxon's translator couldn't quite capture the wonder in his voice. I have submitted a formal request to the Galactic Council. We need a new classification for humans. What did you suggest? Davis asked, genuinely curious. I suggested we create a category for species capable of transcending their own physical limits through emotional bonds. Beings who can overcome seemingly impossible obstacles not through natural ability, but through sheer force of will when protecting those they love. Glaxon turned back to the window. Though perhaps we should simply call it the human category. I doubt we will find many other species who qualify. Inside the room, Emily had fallen asleep against her mother's side. Rebecca stroked her daughter's hair, her bandaged hands gentle. The doctors had said there might be some lasting effects from the radiation exposure, but Rebecca didn't care. Her daughter was alive and safe. Everything else was just details. I have another admission, Glaxon said softly. When Officer Anderson first reported her daughter missing, I thought she was being, what is your word? Overprotective. I did not understand the urgency. And now, Davis prompted. Now I understand that we have been underestimating humans in the most fundamental way possible. Glaxon's crest flattened in a gesture of deep respect. We thought your physical capabilities made you dangerous. But that's not it at all, is it? What makes humans truly remarkable is your capacity to choose to face any danger, defy any odds, when someone you love needs you. Davis smiled. Especially when that someone is our child. Yes. Glaxon watched as Rebecca adjusted Emily's blanket, still protecting her even in sleep. I have recommended that all security forces receive new training about human parental responses. We must understand that when a human parent says their child is in danger, it is not merely concern. It is a declaration that they will move stars themselves if necessary to protect their offspring. The medical staff moved quietly around the room, checking monitors and adjusting treatments. Through it all, Rebecca kept her arm around Emily, her eyes alert despite her own pain and exhaustion. She was still protecting, still watching, still ready to face any threat to her child. Officer Anderson will receive a commendation, Glaxon said. The first of its kind. Not for survival, not for bravery, but for showing us something about humans that we had never understood before. He turned to Davis. How do you do it? How do you choose to face death itself for another? Davis watched the mother and daughter for a long moment before answering. We don't choose to face death, Officer Glaxon. We choose to protect life. Everything else, the danger, the pain, the odds against us, they're just obstacles to be overcome. Because of love, Glaxon said, testing the word. Because of love, Davis confirmed, especially a parent's love. It's the most powerful force humans know. In her medical bed, Rebecca Anderson finally allowed herself to drift off to sleep, secure in the knowledge that her daughter was safe beside her. She didn't know about the commendation coming her way, or about the changes her actions had sparked an alien understanding of human nature. She didn't need to know. She had done what any human parent would do, faced the impossible to protect her child. Because that's what humans did. Not because they were Deathworlders, not because they were physically capable, but because love made them capable of the impossible. And as Officer Glaxon watched over the sleeping humans, he realized that perhaps this was why humans had succeeded in becoming such a significant force in the galaxy. Not because they could survive anything, but because they would face anything to protect those they loved. It was a power greater than any weapon, more reliable than any technology, more unstoppable than any force in known space. The power of a human parent's love. The galaxy would never look at humans quite the same way again.